just to give you a little bit of perspective here. My career path was through information technology, and then I went into operations and then became CEO. Now, I want to preface all my comments today with a story. Some of you may have heard this story, but I think most not. There was a CEO, tired, working long hours, and decided he or she needed a break. Took a break, went out to the wine country. How many people have been to the wine country up in Napa, Sonoma? Nice place to go. They have hot air balloons, right? Well, this CEO said, you know, I'd really like to go hot air ballooning. I'd really prefer to be by myself. And convinced the hot air balloon person that he could take it up and everything would be okay. So all of a sudden he's up in the air, he's, you know, floating across the wine country, really, really enjoying himself, relaxing, and, you know, it's really quite a novel experience. Then all of a sudden he goes, yeah, but where am I? And all of a sudden he looks down and he sees this person down in the vineyard, and so he lowers the balloon down to about, 100 feet off the ground, hangs his head over the side of the basket and says, hello down there. The person on the ground looks up and, hello up there. Where am I? You're 100 feet above a vineyard in a hot air balloon. CEO thinks about it for a minute. He says, you must be in information technology. And sure enough, this person was. He says, you're right. How do you know? Everything you say is true, but it doesn't do me any good. So the individual on the ground, obviously offended, looks up and says, you must be a CEO. You're right. How did you know? You don't know where you are. You don't know where you're going. It was like that before you met me, but now it's my fault. So, with all of this, take everything what I have to say through that kind of grain of salt, okay? If it helps you, fantastic. If it doesn't, I'll understand. So, I'm going to talk about some principles around change, managing change, innovation, how you get to do the things you do and have them matter and be relevant and get used and make a big difference. And then we'll talk about how those have played on a couple of projects that were part of the awards that we as an organization got here at Influence. Insight. Apprehending the true nature of something. One of the first papers that I read when I went to Georgia Tech was a paper by Art Jeffrey. It's an old paper, and it's titled, The Purpose of Mathematical Programming is Insights, Not Answers. And oftentimes, there's so much insight to be had about a problem. We had quite a discussion today at the analytics group. They had a lunch, and we just talked about insights and the ability to just look at data and essentially, in studying just data, the insights that can be derived in terms of how things are connected, how things are structured, what's relevant, what has impact. Insight is an incredibly valuable tool. And in many cases, it can be the most valuable part of any work. So, insight into why not, is key. Helps you understand what is important. So, my father used to say, and now I'm old enough to quote my father, Chris, the importance of knowing what is important. And part of being relevant and doing relevant things is being able to identify what's really important, what matters. And the definition of matters can be a whole gamut of things. But ultimately, it's how many people care. It's how big of a deal is it when you're done. And the one thing that we all have a finite amount of is time, right? We only have so many cycles to do something. And it's, I think, the ability for each of us to figure out how we navigate our time and our attention and apply our skills to those things that matter most, ultimately has an awful lot to do with the satisfaction that we derive from the work that we do and the lives ultimately that we live. So, key part. Now, breakthrough. I had a boss when I worked out in Silicon Valley, and he said, it's what you don't know that you don't know is where you find the breakthrough. Spending a lot of time doing what you know, you advance some things. But there's two really ways of being relevant. One is to focus on the present. So it's solving a problem. It's focusing on today. It's making things better. There's a whole other approach, which I think is starting to emerge, and just looking through some of the materials of the conference, which is focus on the future. It's finding the right question, right? It's not getting the right answer, it's finding the right question. Oftentimes breakthroughs come because somebody stands back and asks a question that nobody asked before, that ultimately opens up this sea of possibilities. Now, it's important to spend a lot of time finding the right question. Why? As opposed to, let's get an answer. It's sometimes changing the game. So, for example, one of the things that I was involved in early in my career was how to optimize chip shooters, surface mount placement machines. And we went through a lot of work, and member of Inform's Mike Trick and I worked on a clever little thing about how to optimize this machine. Now, first of all, what people saw was, oh, this has an optimizer. You don't need to work on that. You don't understand. Turns out that if you studied the machine, it was pretty clear that it wasn't optimized. But that was an opportunity. The other thing that happens is I learned that probably the most fruitful places to go to find things to do is in a place where someone says, you don't understand. Because if you're on the you don't understand, it's probably people don't want you to go there, and it's probably because there's something big that can get unleashed and they just as soon keep it bottled in. So one of the things, someone says, well, you know, you don't really understand. It's like, okay, good. Now let's go to work on this. So making better things, solving the correct problem, asking the right question. I would say those things are what changes the world. So anyway, we have these chip shooters. We're spending all this time optimizing this machine because it was the bottleneck in the line, and found a way to do that, and ultimately, probably at that time back in 1990, saved Motorola between $5 and $10 million a year. Now, I left shortly after that and went out to California. But to me, the real problem, I thought, was going to be, hey, they were just starting to have these programmable chips. And you looked at all of these little devices, all these little points of failure, of solder, reflow, rework, challenges of tests, inventories that had to be kept. And if you looked at the system cost of what happened by having all this little stuff, and you said, if I can combine all this, which is what's happened today in your business, they're all getting put onto chips, and the number of chips is going down. In some cases, the problem of optimizing a machine like that goes away. It becomes simple. You take the cost of goods that go on the board, cause them to go up, but the cost of everything else that was associated with making that board would go down. But we, with all the best of intentions, and saving $10 million a year isn't a bad thing, but you can get so focused on solving this problem that the bigger opportunity can elude you. How do you know? I don't know. But it's always important to step back and say, are we working on the right problem? We might be doing really interesting, novel things. But are we so consumed with that that we don't see this bigger opportunity? And that's easier said than done. But that's where breakthrough comes from, and that's where significant comes from. And so, just something to think about. a scotoma, a blind spot, limiting beliefs. We have a program at Schneider that's called Investment in Excellence, which is really trying to help us as an organization figure out where are these things that we do that stand in the way of us becoming great. Now there's a little story just to understand how these limiting beliefs are, because people act in accordance with the truth, not as it actually is, but as they perceive it to be. One shouldn't assume malice when mere incompetence might explain the facts. And I got plenty of incompetence, so I can say that. But the truth. How often do we hear that we tell the truth? Here's an example. Cliff Johnson, a number of years ago, was a 61-year-old man who had a station, which is a small little ranch in Australia. And Australia every year holds this super long-distance run. And the way this thing is, the greatest runners in the world, they come, they gather, they train, and then they run for about 5 to 6 days across Australia. Well, this guy shows up to the race, signs up, and he's wearing Oshkosh overalls and boots. And people are saying, well, who are you? What makes you think you can run with these great runners around the world gathered here today? What have you done to train? He said, well, I can't afford a horse, and when storms come, I've got to gather up the cattle and the sheep, and so I run for a number of days to bring them back in, and that's how I train. Now, the truth is that in order to win this race, you had to run for 18 hours and sleep for 6. Okay? That was the way it is. If you were going to win this race, that's what you had to do. Well, the race starts, and there's Cliff Johnson, 61-year-old man, all these great runners, long-distance runners in the world. Guess what happens? People forgot to tell him the truth. And so you know what he did? He just ran for 4 days. And so what was a 5 and 6 day race became a 4-day race because he didn't know the truth. Guess what happened the following year? Cliff Johnson showed up, he actually got injured, didn't finish the race, but what do you think was the amount of time it took for the winner to cross the finish line? You know, 4 days, that's exactly right. How often does the truth, as we understand it to be, maybe not actually how it is, focus us to a place where we can't see an innovative and breakthrough opportunity? Watch out for the truth, right? We can see these things happen time and time again, whether it's in sports, whether it's in business, whether it's in academics, doesn't matter. The truth is often the thing that gets in our way because it really isn't true. And so these limiting beliefs, identifying them, being willing to push against them, to ask, what would happen if? Someone says, well, you don't understand. This is how things are. Well, what if they weren't? How do you create a place where it's safe to ask those questions? Not only safe, but it's actually fun to ask those questions. That's where innovation and breakthrough comes. But watch out for the truth, because usually it'll get you. And I can vouch for that. Now, one of the things that we've talked a little bit about, and I'll try to extend that, is that in theory there's no difference between theory and practice. And in practice sometimes there is. Now, is it really true? What happens is that there are just these anomalies, these things that can't be modeled or changed or make this thing hard to incorporate. So we shouldn't throw everything out, but we also should recognize sometimes it can be more important to get the solution than to develop the theory. Now, one of the things that I know people in our field get frustrated by is that I will promise you, the IQ of this room, this building, this conference is not average. And that doesn't mean below, it means well above. But you know what? That sword cuts sharp both ways. Because you can have a novel idea, a really, really good idea, and you can talk to your colleagues here, and they're going, oh, that's fantastic, that's great. Problem is that if the people who have to go and implement it and use it do not understand it, and they don't trust you because they may not understand what you're talking about, all of that good work could be for naught. I really do like this quote here. It is a simplicity that makes the uneducated more effective than the educated when addressing the popular audiences. How do you take what it is you know, the insights you have, the understanding you have, and find a way to package it for the people who have to accept it, who are going to undergo that change? You know, I'm here from corporate, I'm here to help. Yeah, right. I remember the last one who came to help us, right? Well, part of it is how do you package it? Because you're going to now take what somebody did, the truth as they knew it, and you're going to move that. There's a book out called Who Moved My Cheese? Anyone ever read that book? Yeah, who moved my cheese, right? Well, the cheese was here, and we kept going, and the cheese isn't there, and then people are frustrated. Well, you're going to move their cheese, and you got to help them find the cheese that was here and is now over here. The other thing is that, and this is probably more say as I do, or do as I say, not as I do, but one of the things that becomes pretty important in getting people to accept change was a statement that somebody made to me when I was probably in one of my less fine moments. Because by God, we knew it was right, we should get going, why the heck aren't they doing it? And this person came up very politely and said, well, you know, Chris, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So if you want to do something, make a difference, you're going to cause people to have to go through change. What I will promise you, unless they believe that you have their interest at heart, guess what? At best, they will ignore you. At worst, they will submarine you. And that's human nature. And you can say, what's wrong with them? I would challenge you to say, what is it that we're not doing? Because in some cases, if we're really good enough, then they're smart enough. And our ability to simplify things down to the essence is a way to get people to understand. And when people understand, I think people are willing to do the right thing. How many people got up this morning and said, I'm going to just do the wrong thing today? Any hands? I don't think many people wake up saying, geez, how can I do the wrong thing? How can I be a pain? How can I stand in the way of progress? But the reality is that we're all there trying to do the best we can, all worried about uncertainty, and if people are going to do things to us, all of us included, will ultimately push back. Now, robustness. One of the things that, you know, I'm extremely proud of the Schneider organization is that our world is, you know, on the ground. We pick stuff up, we deliver it, charge people, and hopefully make a little bit of money doing it. But it seems like a simple business. But the reality is there's stuff like congestion. There's stuff like snowstorms. There's floods that wipe out bridges. There's derailments on the railroad. There's all of these things which says kind of the world as we see it and the world that will ultimately go and implement and run a solution can be very, very different. I would say that a quote that probably applies to the work that we do at Schneider is like this: we plan and God laughs. And so in order to come up with methodology, solutions that we can implement and that ultimately the business can run on, given variability of 10,000 plus tractors and drivers and trailers and containers running around the country at any one time, things are never going to be the way exactly we thought they were. And if essentially we have to take a solution for one small change and it turns everything upside down, well, you know what, it's not very useful, right? Anything that's that sensitive to optimality is probably not ultimately going to work. Not that it isn't optimal, it's just not usable. And so this robustness is a key function in order for things to get used. Because if you're going to ask people to change, do something different, trust what it is that you've provided them, that often comes in some form of software, not always, but sometimes, and that ultimately you want them to do what it is it tells them to do, only then to have to redo it 2, 3, 4, 5 times, making work for them. Again, that's not implementable. And so robustness is a very, very important thing in the real world. That's what will get people to use it. And sometimes keeping it simple enough so that it doesn't just ultimately change when change happens is really, really a key thing. Now, innovation is about transformation. It's about change. We all know we don't like to change. But the fact is that to get from one place to another, it's just a requirement of doing things that are meaningful. Now, if you are lucky enough to operate within systems that don't touch or impact human beings, you may get off the hook on this stuff. I just don't know many of those situations today. Some exist, clearly. But I think the big, big breakthroughs for this organization in terms of impacting mankind, economies, are going to have to impact and be right up with the human being. And so taking people through that is key. It's what about being relevant is. And it's what makes your job the hardest. I will tell you on this thing that we did on the chip shooters, I think Mike Trick and I worked on developing the algorithm, software, probably for 3 months. In order to get the company to use it, then it was, how are we going to actually get a bill of materials, automate it so that their job gets easier, so then ultimately then how do we do that, and then how do we download it so they don't have to program it into this CNC machine. And all of that took another 8 months. But we made people's jobs easier, so they actually used it, so the company actually got the benefit, and so that we saved the money. Most of the work was not in solving the problem. It was getting it used. And unfortunately, I think that is the nature of most of the work that you do. Is, how do I get this? I got it, I've solved it, it's wonderful. Now how do I get it implemented and people to matter, care about it, and that it ultimately makes the difference that you were trying to make. Now, a couple of things. How did this play out at Schneider? We'll try to walk through this. Black Friday, right? The day after Thanksgiving. It's a retail day of wonderment. But it's a logistical nightmare for those people who will participate in those supply chains. So what Walmart does, and this is Walmart, our largest customer, essentially down there was a product. One year it was a TV, one year it was a CD player, one year it was a DVD player. But they have this special, and what it is that they actually load this product. You go into the store, you buy it, you get a ticket, you go out, and they'll just unload it right off the trailer. And so what has to happen is in 12,000 stores, the day after Thanksgiving, that trailer has to sit there and be ready. And it's a bad thing if it's not, I can tell you. Now, we like that business. it's complex, it's a way for us to differentiate what we do, whole thing. Well, we had essentially a group of our operating people who were responsible for what we call direct-to-store come forward, and they had a problem because you have to stage this stuff out in the field so that it can be brought to the store the night of Thanksgiving. Well, they came and said, you know, the problem we would like you engineers to solve for us is, how do we stage all of these trailers we're going to need at this loading facility in Savannah? What order do we do it? How big does it need to be? Would you figure that out for us? The reality is that a group of really smart people said, well, why are you doing that? What if we looked at this thing a little bit differently? Because they were going to tour all of these things back, go out and park these trailers, as opposed to how can we find one-way capacity, not a closed network, but an open network that will systematically, over time, stage this product out in those facilities. It was a supply chain, like trailers are products, storage places are like warehouses, and then how over time do we distribute these things, finding transportation that doesn't come back, and the inefficiencies that came from that. Well, people thought, oh, hey, good idea. Well, it turns out that it's a pretty standard methodology that got used. We didn't have to invent new methodology. But what we were able to do then is to make this easy. And part of making it easy is they used to take one solution over this 3 months that this event happened in preparation for it, run it once and then implement it, and then when something changed, and it always changed, do the best they could to kind of fit something in. Well, ultimately what happened is a tool got created that took about 2 hours to run. So if a change came in a day, run the tool. It didn't make big sweeping changes, so it was robust. And all of a sudden, we could get our operating people focusing on, does the driver know what they have to do? Does the driver know where it is? Where are we in place? And what happened was something that was magical across all fronts. Our drivers got better dispatches. Our operating people felt really good and could work through that. And frankly, we were 100% on time. So our customer was really happy. And having happy customers is a really good thing, especially when they're as big as Walmart. So here was something where the problem got framed one way. People had the courage and I hope the flexibility and freedom to say, why do you want to do that? Let me understand more. Are you sure that's what you want to do? And ultimately came at this an entirely different way and achieved a great outcome for everybody. So, and I believe that was one of the prize-winning things that we had here, but it was really, really great work. So, you know, I think I covered everything here, but imagine improving profitability, which is really good for our shareholders, right, by 13%. So the shareholder won too on that deal. Now, to me, that's relevant. It's significant. This organization said it was significant. Our organization certainly said it was significant. The customer thought it was great. We got additional business in the following years doing it. And so that was a really beautiful thing. Here's another one, and we're kind of right in the middle of this one now. Version 2. One of the challenges that we have an intermodal business where we load containers on the train, run them long distances, and then we have to deliver them, either pick them up at one end and deliver them on the other with trucks. And it looks like, essentially, call it a little bit like a taxi cab problem, if you will. So, locally, we have a number of these loads that have to be picked up at different rail ramps, delivered into the customers, picked up at a customer, brought back to a rail ramp. And then we have to move things called a crosstown that goes, if you're on one railroad, the BNSF for us, and the Eastern Railroad, the CSX, got to transfer them across town so that they can go on their way and deliver on the East Coast. And so that problem is there. Now, one of our biggest issues is that we have a lot of really, really good, committed long-term people who have been doing this. And they go, well, you don't understand, right? You don't understand. Actually, here is up in the front is part of working this thing. So it's like they don't use it. It's a great, great methodology, really good optimization, good engineering, nice implementation of the software. And what we found is that people weren't using it because you just don't understand. Now, the reality is that if you think of changing a 1% load ratio, so oftentimes if something goes out and comes back, we call that a 50% load ratio. If we can pick something up on the way back, 1% change for us is worth about $800,000 a month. That's real money. I would call that relevant. That gets people a good pat on the back and opportunities to go and do more things. And that's a big deal. Now the problem is that people won't use it. All that good work was for naught. So in this problem, one of the things that had to be done was to teach people why it can make their job better, their job easier, and make them more effective. One of the most novel things that I saw in terms of how this ultimately is getting people to adopt it is they created a game. Simple game, 12 loads, 12 drivers, and can you figure out, here it is, figure out how you want to assign loads to drivers so that you will minimize the amount of money it costs us to do this. And we let people come up with their solutions. And then we let them run the solver. And they see the gap. And then it creates the solution to say, well, I don't like this right here. Okay, well, why don't you like that? Well, it doesn't make sense. Go ahead and change it. And whatever happens, you show them the outcome and they go, oh, why is that? And part of it is that as human beings, it is very difficult for us to see the system connections. And oftentimes these problems can't be solved one at a time, right? Greedy kinds of things lead you to problems, and it's real money. And so by getting people to say, oh, I guess there's some merit to this, we're getting adoption rates. So again, this is having a huge impact in our business. It is actually making their jobs easier because they're having to spend less time doing it. And there's real money that comes out of this for the company. So most of the time, though, wasn't spent building the optimizer. It was spent helping people understand business process changes that have to occur. Teaching people that it will make their job easier. Helping them understand what it's doing so that they can have trust and confidence in what it is they're doing. Because if they get it too wrong, the drivers will give them pushback. And making sure that, frankly, it is robust. Because if all of a sudden throughout the day you're changing somebody's dispatch, it's rework of epic proportion. So once we get there, we want it to hold and to stay because there is variability, right? There's congestion. Chicago's our major hub. And I'll guarantee you Chicago traffic is not reliable. How many people have been in Chicago during rush hour? The time it takes to drive there has got wide variance. So this is a huge deal. Again, incredibly relevant. Well done in terms of engineering, but masterfully done in terms of thinking, how do I now go get people to adopt the change? The other thing that is really hard for me, I think it's hard for any organization, is just this realization that what got you here is not going to get you to the next place. What this is a little graph of the revenues of Apple. Fantastic company. What it shows you is in the green, that's the percentage of revenue in 2003 that was associated with the Macintosh. That's most of Apple. Look way out there in 13. what that is. If Apple would have stayed saying, we got this great product, it's the Mac, that's who we are, it's what we do, imagine what would have happened to that meteoric stock that they enjoy today. And then look at the innovation. But what they couldn't do is stay with what it was that was going well, right? The enemy of great is good. Because when things are good, what's the incentive? Probably the greatest compliment someone once gave me was, I am an optimistic discontent. I'm happy with where we are, but we better not stay there very long. And I think that's a lot of the challenge here as you think about innovation and the impacts that you can have on it. Because whatever it is today, don't keep doing it. Figure out what the next thing is. Because that keeps you relevant. It's great to be relevant today. What are you going to do to be relevant tomorrow? So, all of this goes with people and systems and businesses and universities. Is management's about doing things right. That's management. Do things right. Leadership is about doing the right things. And then innovation is about doing new things. Easier said than done. And for those of you who are in research laboratories, you obviously have this great opportunity to innovate. Those of you that are in operations for companies, boy, it's like, okay, we got to do this thing right every day. And how you blend those in whatever your roles are or whatever your companies are is a balancing act. And it goes back to what little time you have to do any of those things better. Pick the highest leverage thing. Now, this is one of my favorite little cartoons. It's a Herman cartoon. And for those of you in the back, what it says and what it is there's this caveman sitting on the ground in front of a Gatling gun with a clip and a screwdriver. And behind this is two other cavemen with spears. And the tagline says, are you going to sit around inventing, or are you coming hunting, or are you going to sit around here all day inventing? Well, here's the reality. The people that like to build Gatling guns, they go, see how important is what I do? And you're right, it is important. But you know what? You don't do much inventing if you don't do much eating. And it's that balance of, okay, what do you do? Just be conscious of it. Are you making things better, which is a valid, important, critical thing, or are you going to make better things? Both have huge significance and relevance, but oftentimes we can get confused on what are we really trying to do. And the answer is not this or this, it's both. And that's the great balancing act that all of you have to do, but companies have to do. So, I don't know if any of this is useful, but frankly, this stuff sits in the back of my head. It's what I took away from the time when I got to do things that were of technical significance, hopefully significance, but they serve me well every single day in what I do, which is mostly about dollars and people. Very few algorithms and formulas. But with that, I would open it up to questions if there are any. And if there are not, I would just thank you for being here, and I'm honored by your presence. So, any other questions?